Um, excuse me. 80% of our members have all lost somebody, maybe 90%. Although I have noticed in recent years with the baby boomers like myself coming of age, we're starting to get a lot of people in that group that are joining just because they're curious. They're facing their own mortality. And I figured, okay, no, now it's a good time to really start talking, excuse me, about this. So, but yeah, I mean, to answer your question, yeah, people, and we saw, tangible results. I mean, so my God, just the, people would, they still do. You saved my life. I was, I was going to take my own life. I didn't know how I was going to survive, and we provided a lifeline for that. I mean, it's not for everybody. Some people, that they become defined by their grief. Their grief becomes who they are as a person, and to those people, if I or somebody else makes the suggestion that their loved one may still exist, they're insulted by that. And how dare you, say, my son is dead. He's never coming back. And how could you even say that he still, survives? Because that suggestion to them sort of diminishes the depth of their grief. I know the way that they're thinking.
Right.
There's usually nothing, that we or anybody else can do with those people. And they live a very tortured life because of that, life filled with sadness, whereas others have that spark and that hope. And I mean, it's, listen, having your loved one exist in another dimension is not the same. I mean, you still can't hug them and kiss them. They're not there physically in your life, but if you know that they're there, that they remain a part of our life, it can make a difference.
Wow. Bob, you mentioned a good point that, you have some people that, everybody handles grief differently, and you have some that, you know, remain tortured, I think was what you had said, because, for them, it's like, everybody is continuing to live, right, where their loved one is gone. What would you say to those who have loved ones that are going through a situation like that, and how they can support those individuals better?
Well, as you know, there's not a lot of things that you can say to somebody, especially when it's new. I mean, people say the stupidest things. They don't mean to, but they do. Um, and I try when I'm with somebody to just listen. It's just listen and hug, and offer some quiet support. I remember after my daughter died, people saying to me, "Well, God needed another angel," and I'm like, "Really? Out of the billions of souls that have passed over, he needed my daughter. I mean, it made no sense to me, and I just wanted to strangle people when they said stuff like that, even though I know that they're good people and they meant well. But I just simply now I talk about some of the things that have happened in my life, and things that are non-physical in nature, and people listen and they're interested, and then all of a sudden they'll tell me a story, about something that happened to them that they can't explain. And I mean, the goal is sort of like cognitive behavior therapy. If somebody changes the way they think about death, it can have, positive effects. And you could do that through reading, or you could do that through, learning about the research and the evidence, or you might have a profound personal experience. I mean, it could be a dream visitation, or it could be an astounding reading with a medium, or a near death experience, or an amazing, synchronicity where you just know, that it's real. And people, can flip that way. They can flip from, one life to another. So, we never would dare to suggest that the work we do, or the work that anybody does for that matter, can fix or heal grief. That's nonsense. I mean, you're always going to have a hole in your heart. It's just learning to live with that, and you can. I used to say to myself, okay, look, after a while, like at the beginning, I just wanted to curl up in a ball and make the world go away. But then one day I just said, okay, I have a choice. I can curl up, in a ball, and stay away from everything, or I could try to find some meaning and purpose in this life. then you go through things. Well, what would my daughter want me to do? You know, is there a reason, you know, behind this? Uh, and doing. I mean, it sounds. I used to be suspect of people that were constantly doing good deeds for other. I always thought they had ulterior motive, you know. But the only thing when you lose, especially if you lose a child, I mean, you're stripped down to nothing. I mean, life as you knew it is over, and you have different goals and you have different wants, and things that were important to you are no longer important. But what I found was the only thing that gave me any kind of comfort was helping somebody else, because you're already so far gone, you know, just this, the only way to go is up. So, and it could be little things that you don't have to start a foundation. I mean, you know, the simplest acts of kindness, can spread and reverberate like the butterfly effect, you know. So, it's all, you know, sooner or later, you have to make a decision on how do you want to live the rest of your life. And honestly, I mean, this may sound stupid. One of my coping mechanisms were I said, okay, so I could sit around and I could waste the next 40 years of my life, you know, as an productive individual, and then I'm going to die, and then I'm going to wake up and find out I still exist. And then I'm going to say to myself, shit, you know, I wasted 40 years of my life, you know, when I could have been doing so many things. You
Right,
know, I looked at it
right.
from a practical standpoint.
Absolutely. Um, can you talk a little bit about living a life of contribution after the devastation that that you went through? Because you spoke just now about what, wanting to live again and having to realize that, looking at what your daughter would want you to do and the fact that you don't want to live the next 40 years with this, grief and this sorrow. So you want to actually live a life, live a meaningful life. But can you tell us a little bit about living life of contribution after such a devastating loss?
Well, you know, it was a gradual thing. I just, you know, gravitated towards my wife was, you know, my wife passed away almost 5 years ago, but you know, she was the driving force behind it. I just went along for the ride, you know, and honestly, um, for the first years I was a hypocrite because here I am giving talks, you know, about, you know, evidence of an afterlife and consoling people, and I didn't truly buy in myself. Yeah, so that changed, you know, after about 7 years. But at the beginning, I was just looking, you know, for myself to, you know, to survive in some way. But when we started having these retreats, you know, it really changed because, I mean, I was one of the people that would attend a retreat like that, and I just felt like there's an invisible bond, you know, that ties everybody at the retreat together, and we keep them small. There's only 50 some odd people there, and you just want to go around and hug everybody because when, as I say to the people there, I mean, they may never be in a situation like that, surrounded by that many people, where every single person in that room truly knows how they feel. You know, I mean, really knows, not just, you know, saying things. So yeah, that's really when I became enlightened to the fact that you have to. I mean, you have to do what you can to help other people. And you know, I mean, that's what I do. I'm not a great, you know, philanthropist, and I don't do other causes. I'm so, you know, running this organization takes up pretty much all my time. But that's the way, you know, that I give back. Other people give back in so many, you know, different ways. So, you know, and it doesn't mean that I, you know, became you know, a swami and, you know, moved to India and then, you know, and then gave up all my material possessions. You know, I didn't, but that's not my driving force. You know, I mean, like, as I said, and I still say it, you know, I'd give up everything that I own and ever owned, you know, for 5 more minutes with my daughter, you know, so you're always going to have that. But, we live, I also believe that, and that's what the evidence shows, that when we go to the other side, so to speak. Innocently, I hate the term afterlife, even though I use it, because to me, it's not afterlife. It's just life. It's a continuum.
Right.
But you know, so I think what seems clear is that when we cross over, we go with like-minded individuals. So if you lived a life of of goodness and compassion, you'll be with other people like that. If you were a miserable SOB, you're going to be with other miserable SOBs. It's self-judgment. There's not a panel or a deity that says you go here or you go there. We go where we belong. And that evidence comes from, near-death experience reports, and channeled writings and so forth. So, that's what I believe. Near-death experiencers talk about a life review, where their whole life, flashes before their eyes and they get to feel, deeply feel the good that they imparted towards others. And that must feel really good. But conversely, they also feel the harm and the discomfort that they either consciously or unconsciously inflicted upon others. And that doesn't feel so good. So, you learn by that life review and then you go that now also I believe that you don't stay in it's progression. Some people talk about spheres, some people talk about dimensions of different frequency. Whatever you want to call it, I think that you evolve on the other side. Here it's the only place where you can get this physical rush, but in all these other places, it's quite different.
I have another question for you. How do you feel about the concept of divine design versus randomness? Meaning, do you personally feel that tragedies have some sort of a meaning? Like, are they to teach us anything?
Well, if you talk to virtually every single person that I work with, including the mediums, they will tell you that everything is by design, that we come back, for a reason. Um, there are no such things as coincidence. It never. Sometimes people look at me cross-eyed in the community that I work in, but it never resonated with me. I believe that my daughter was in the wrong place at the wrong time. I believe that my wife got pancreatic cancer because it was just genetics or the luck of the draw. Um, I think that we live in a world of randomness. However, and this may sound like a contradiction in terms, it's randomness by design. So what I mean by that is I once read a book by one of the great shamans. Actually, it was a collection of stories from the shamans. One shaman said that this physical life is like being at a football game. If you have ground level seats, you hear the noise and see the violence and the chaos and the apparent, uh, randomness of everything. But it's not until you move up to the very top row of the stadium that you see all the patterns forming and you see the organization. And he said, that's what our life is like. We don't see that randomness, that we only see the randomness, and it doesn't move into coherence and understanding and organization until we move to the other side. So I was never one to believe that, um, that everything is planned. Now that doesn't mean it became very clear to me that my daughter knew that she was going to live a short life. I didn't realize it at the time, but when I discovered all her writings and everything and remembered conversations, I know in my heart that that she knew. So some people, even though it's not planned, some people have the ability to perceive future and past events, and I believe that's the reason why people sometimes have this knowing. It's physicists will tell you that in other dimensions there's no past, present, and future. They're happening all at once. So it's a complicated issue. One thing I've learned over the years is to remain open to everything, and I still am. But my personal opinion is, in this physical realm, I think it's dominated by free will.
You had just said something about reading Bailey's writings. Your daughter's name was Bailey, correct?
Yeah.
About reading Bailey's writings and some items that kind of led you to believe she knew she was going to have a short life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my daughter was 15 when she passed, but she was already an accomplished writer. She was really good. That's why I think we were so close, because I'm a writer as well. And we used to talk about projects. But in any event, after my daughter died, my wife and my other daughter went on Bailey's computer, and they found like a treasure trove of writings, essays, poetry, all sorts of things, which we had published in a book called Hidden Treasure, and because we just published it so we could give it out to friends and family and so forth. But much of her writing was about death and what happens after death. As a matter of fact, she wrote this beautiful poem called "The Wonder Awaits," talking about it ends with when it's her time to go. Her main mission is going to come back and let us know, that she's okay and what everything is like there. So, I mean, how could I not do that work? But, I remember that things like she was on a college, we were on a college tour with my middle child. And since Bailey was only 2 years behind, we brought her too. And it's a nice day. We're looking over the college, and then I glanced and I didn't see Bailey. So I start scanning around and I see her off in the distance sitting on a bench. And I approached her and I saw there were tears like streaming down her eyes. And I said, Bailey, what's the matter? And she said, Dad, I have so many things I need to do with my life. What if I don't get a chance to do them? No, and I did what most parents would do. Like, Bailey, you're 15 years old. You're bright, you're beautiful. You could do anything you want in life, but I didn't know. I mean, I should. She had this inner knowing, and that wasn't the only thing. I mean, she was kind of obsessed with these things. So, in retrospect, and she's not the only one. I've come across many, 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 especially children, but adults too, that had this inner knowledge that can't be explained in material terms, that their lives were going to be short.
Wow. Now, okay, okay, Bob, sometimes I do a thing where I get stories mixed up, but I believe this was a story from Bailey's friend, something about a blue highlighter.
Yeah. So Bailey, when she was 13 years old, she made her best friend enter into a pact with her. And the pact was that if they were each to make up a sign, um, that they would leave for each other in case one of them died, so the other one would know that they still existed. I mean, what 13-year-old does that? So, and I didn't know about it at the time, and neither did my wife. But um, after Bailey's funeral, her best friend came over the house. I didn't know about this till a long time after. My friend never told me, but um, Bailey's pact to her friend was that she was the sign she was going to leave was that she was going to take a blue magic marker, um, and leave it in a unusual place. And her friend said when she came back after the funeral, she walked into her room and neatly placed on her computer keyboard was a blue magic marker. And she went on to tell my wife that to her knowledge, she didn't own one. She hasn't used one in years. And of course, she lived as a child. She lived with her parents, and she went around to her parents and her brother and asked if anybody had been in the room, and they said no. So, I mean, you might say that's an example of psychokinesis, the mind affecting matter, which can happen, in this life, and in other lives, from other dimensions. So, I mean, you would consider to be something extraordinary, but it these were things that were happening, and I didn't have any frame of reference for it. I just said, "Oh, what a coincidence," But it wasn't until years later when I put everything together. All sorts of things were happening, with signs and communication. Um, so yeah, that was one of the stories.
My gosh. Let's segue into to you, your personal experience with mediums, right? Like the first time that you sat with one.
Well, I didn't believe in mediums. I remember that about 2 months before my daughter died, I was playing golf with a friend of mine, and my friend had just lost his wife to cancer, and we were sitting around in the car waiting to tee off the next hole, and he turns around to me and he says, "Bob, I got to tell you something." I said, "What?" He said, "I went to a medium, and all of a sudden, like, I didn't know exactly what a medium was, but these alarm bells started going off in my head. And I, he started telling me, well, and she knew all these extraordinary things about my wife that she couldn't possibly have known. And I really felt like I was talking to my wife. And then he saw that glazed look in my eyes, the same look that people give me now, and I said something lame to him. Well, you never know, Kenny. And I remember going home and telling my wife, I'm so worried about Kenny. He's going to this fortune teller and she's going to take all his money, and his grief is so bad that he's, imagining all this stuff. And of course, look at my wife now, so, but, after, Bailey died, my wife dragged me, she believed, in mediums, and she dragged me to a well-known medium. And this medium had a room in a hotel in Manhattan. We lived in New York at the time. And it was for a bunch of couples. It was a special thing for couples that have lost children. And this medium also goes into a semi-trance and starts talking in a deep voice, which, kind of freaked me out. And I'm sitting what am I doing? I'm sitting in a hotel room in Manhattan in the dark, and I'm listening to, this foolishness. And then the medium, brings through my daughter, and tells me three things. The first thing, is that the medium said, I have your daughter, and she wants to tell me that she's really glad that you discovered all of the writings on her computer. I just told you about that. So that got my attention. I mean, that is not really something, how many 15-year-olds have a vast storehouse of writings on their computer?
Correct.
So I said, okay, I woke up a little bit to that. And then my daughter also had this thing where every month she'd come to me and half joking, she'd say, come on, Dad, come on, admit it. I'm your favorite child, admit it. And every month, I'd say, Bailey, I love all my kids. I love you too, but I'm not going to say I love you more than anybody else. Well, she did this for years. She would always do that. And I'm the kind of person, I understand why people go to cemeteries, but I never do. I was there for the funeral. That was the last time I was there. Because I don't think of her as being there. Her shell, her body is there, but she's not there. But in any event, there was another funeral in the family, so I was forced to go. And while I was there, I visited my daughter, and I was alone, and I knelt down by her grave, and I started talking to her, and I said, okay, Bailey, I admit it. You were my favorite. And the medium says to me, oh, and she wants me to tell you that she knows that she was your favorite. And I just said that like 24 hours before. So, that was another thing that got my attention. But the last thing was 2 days before we went to this medium, my wife woke up and she said, you smell smoke? I said, no. She said, there's smoke in the house. I went back to sleep. She, of course, we had 3 levels in the home. She went down to the bottom level. Smoke permeated down there, but there was nothing that was amiss that could be causing it. And then she went up to the first floor and walked the whole length of the house that smelled like smoke. There was nothing. And then the top floor where the bedroom was, walked down the halls, inspected every room. Everything smelled like smoke, but didn't find any cause. And then the medium said, oh, and Dad, you'll know when she's around by the smell of smoke. So I drove home to, Long Island where we live, from Manhattan, that whole time, trying to figure out the trick, how to be a trick, and this was, 22 years ago. So it wasn't, not everybody was picking up things from the internet, and besides, you couldn't research that. Nobody knew about that. Right.
Right.
So that opened me up, did it convince me? No, but it certainly opened the door for me to, explore it more. So I was fortunate, because one of the reasons that we do this medium certification program that we've been doing since 2005 is to, you know, have a reliable resource for the bereaved. So if I would have gone to a medium, and I went to another medium that fits this category, who got absolutely nothing right, if that was the only medium I went to, I'd walk out of there feeling worse than I did when I walked in. So it's The mediums have a lot of responsibility, you know, that people don't quite realize.
That now concludes the second episode of our 4-part series, She's Just Elsewhere, a conversation about life after death with Bob Ginsberg. Stay tuned and follow for the next episode. Two Talking Fools podcast can be found and listened to on all platforms. Visit us at twotalkingfools.com.